technologies and reshaping the Joint Staff Support Emerging Cyberspace Operations concept. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please give Jack a well-deserved warm welcome.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Yep, okay. So first of all, it's a packed house. Okay, all I can say is everybody out there is missing the best brief of the day. Okay. So are you flicking or do I just push? Okay. All right, so I'm going to begin at the title. So shared understanding for velocity, precision, and agility. If anybody in this crowd has listened to Admiral Rogers speak about cyber operations, cyber defense, you will often hear him use the term speed, precision, and agility, right? This is a little play on his term of speed, precision, and agility, and as I go through this, I'm going to kind of focus on why am I talking about the velocity side of this as opposed to just speed, okay? All right, let's get into it, and if there are a lot of questions, I'm okay with questions along the way if you want to come up and ask, all right? All right, just a little background for everybody. U.S. Cyber Command, as you've probably seen in many forums, is responsible for the full spectrum cyber mission, offense and defense. Today, we are just focused on that middle box, the secure, operate, and defend mission of the Cybercom total spectrum. General Lin is the commander responsible for the secure, operate, and defend mission, reporting to Admiral Rogers. Now, isn't necessarily always the sexiest box, right? A lot of discussion on the offensive sides, right? You'll go to a lot of meetings about tools, techniques, capabilities that we need for offensive operations. But I will argue that the most important operation is defense, right? In all of the domains, offense stems from your ability to defend your own forces, right? And I will argue that it's no different in cyberspace. So as we step into the cyberspace domain, one of the things I want to talk about is what is our role and how does it relate to other people that are in the defensive cyber mission? We don't talk about this very often. So today, as I mentioned before, Admiral Rogers and U.S. Cybercom are responsible for full spectrum cyber. But from a strategic perspective, they are responsible for setting the conditions for successful operation of all forces, and in our case, of the defensive forces. This is what all combatant command, or sub-unified commands in this case, do. This is what they're responsible for, setting the conditions to allow the operational commanders to conduct their mission. This is as true today in the cyber domain as it is in any of the physical domains. Okay? General Lin is the commander of Joint Force Headquarters-DODIN. In his role as Joint Force Headquarters-DODIN in the little yellow wedge, he is responsible at the operational level of conflict. He is responsible for synchronizing all the people doing defensive operations every day across the DoD. Right? In that capacity, in the joint doctrine language, he is doing what is called exercising operational art. He is guiding the forces and giving them intent so that they are executing the missions they need to execute. Okay? An analogy I often use is if you are in an orchestra, you have a bunch of musicians, right? And when they're tuning up, it's a bunch of cacophony. It's a lot of notes, not a whole lot of music. The role of the conductor is to synchronize the musicians in time and space so that notes turn into music. And that's what General Lin does as the commander of the Joint Force Headquarters. That's what we, his staff, do. to support him in that. This is where the velocity thing comes in. Okay? So when you're thinking about speed, right? Speed, precision, and agility. When you're playing something and you're playing by yourself, all you have to worry about is speed, right? But when you're worried about getting a bunch of other people to play together, right? You want them to be fast, but you all want them moving in the same direction, right? So the difference between speed and velocity is speed and direction. And General Lin's job is to synchronize the tactical forces, all of the DoD components, the entirety of the DoD doing defense, so that they are operating for a desired outcome at a desired time. He's synchronizing them in time and space to achieve the result we want. I don't want a bunch of people just running fast in all directions, and neither does he. He wants them running all fast in the right direction. Okay? General Lin also happens to be a tactical commander. He runs the organization DISA. Right? DISA has global reach, and many of the people in this room do work with DISA on a daily basis. Right? But in the providing of services, from our perspective, that is a tactical function. They are doing the execution, the hands-on work. When he is operating in the capacity as an operational commander, he's doing the planning, the thinking about where do we need to go? What are we dealing with today, and where do we need to go? All right? If I'm using a football analogy, he's fundamentally the defensive coordinator. He's not out there defending, right, he himself. He is the defensive coordinator, and we as staff are doing that coordination on his behalf with all the components, with all the players on the team, so that we can defeat the opposing team, right? The defense, the threats, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So when General Lin is operating as the commander, his team, the players, if you will, make up all of the components in the DoD, all 54 DoD components, all of the military services, all of the combatant commands, all of the agencies and field activities. Now, as you can imagine, the DoD is a big organization. Each of those entities within the organization are big organizations in and of themselves, right? So much of his effort is focused on helping them all understand where it is we're trying to go and what we're going to do to get there, right? While he fully understands that each of them has their own mission, the thing they're trying to do, what keeps them busy every day, right? Okay. But fundamentally, in the vernacular, in the Joint Doctrine vernacular, our role is to deter the adversary, right? Defend against the adversary, right? Disrupt or defeat the adversary should they get into our network, right? The same thing that occurs in all the other domains by all the other warfighters. Right? So we'd argue that the cyber domain is not necessarily, while it's really quick, things happen fast. There are a lot of similarities between what occurs in the defensive domain, in the cyber domain, as in the other domains. Right? So when we stood up, we spent about a year thinking in the wrong direction, is what I'd say. Right? We began down the path of trying to articulate the DODIN, the DoD networks, and looking at it from the lens of network topologies, of how is everything connected and wired together, right? Because most of us have came from the NetOps community. Most of us have run these centers. So we began down the path of looking at how we used to look at NetOps. How's everything wired and connected? And what we began to realize along the way, with some help from some outside help helping us look at ourselves, was that it's not necessarily how the networks are connected. It's really who is responsible and what is the relationship amongst the entities who own and operate the network every day. Right? It's really about relationships. So in this journey, we jumped back into joint doctrine, and really within like the first under 20 pages in joint doctrine, the first thing it says, well, not the first, but early on in the first chapter, it talks about organizing for sustained operations, organizing for joint operations. And what do? Okay? You figure out who's responsible for what, and you assign them accountability and responsibility for their piece of the battle space. Right? In joint doctrine, that's called areas of operations. So when we started to do that, we said, well, holy cow. Even though DoD policy for years has said, all you people are responsible, all you components are responsible for protecting and defending all your stuff, what we have never said is you need to focal point the status, how well you are defending, the state of your defense, etc., up to a common point so we have common understanding across the department of the state of defense of the organization. Right? And if you, the various commanders or agency heads, need assistance, you articulate that up through us so we can put together a coordinated message up through Cybercom and up to the Pentagon of what we need and how we need to move forward. Again, there's nothing new here. We pulled concepts out of joint doctrine that have worked and worked well in all of the other domains, in the air, sea, and land domain. And we are simply applying them into this domain space. So, by the end of this month, or early into the July timeframe, we will release an order called Operation Gladiator Shield. It is a rewrite of a Cyber Command order, but we will release it under Joint Force Headquarters-DODIN. And in it, we begin to organize the cyber battle space to do this, right? Which will then hold the different commanders, if you will, organization heads responsible for understanding themselves, understanding the adversary, and understanding how they are defending themselves and the state of their defense. Right? Now, in order to do that, those defensive forces have a lot to share, a lot to know. Today, when you hear discussions about the Cyber Mission Force, right, the Cyber Mission Force, if you're looking at this picture, is really very often focused at the ice above the waterline. Right? When the adversary gets in, we take these defensive forces and we go out there and they got great skills, great tools, great techniques, and they're going after to remove the adversary from the network. If you had an opportunity to listen to an earlier discussion by Commander Evans in the DCO Ops, he talked about 4 phases of DCO Operations, right? Often those actions in discussions are about what those guys at the top are doing, right? But the funny thing about an iceberg is, in order to have that stuff at the top, you actually need all the stuff at the bottom, under the water line, to make that iceberg an iceberg, right? It doesn't float unless there's a part beneath the water line doing the day-to-day job of, in this case, defending. And the bulk of the defense work on a day-to-day basis, the people that have to be organized, have to be synchronized, have to understand what's going on across the DoD writ large, are all these entities on the bottom. And we've done a tremendous job focusing investments, etc., on the top. And our job is to help shape and guide where the DoD components are going so that we get understanding below the waterline. Because ultimately, we need understanding below the waterline and above the waterline, and these have to come together. Because then you can get, you can achieve the shared situational awareness necessary to operate with velocity, precision, and agility. Now, that's no easy task. So as we organize in this concept, what we are going to expect of the AOs, of the various commanders, is they can organize themselves. And to do that, they have to understand themselves. They have to understand their terrain and what's important to defend in their terrain, and to be able to articulate that to the commander of what's important. And they have to have a way of understanding the adversary and sharing information about the adversary. And each one of the components needs it, because I can't achieve, Joint Force Headquarters can't achieve, and U.S. Cyber Command cannot achieve the velocity, precision, agility, or speed, precision, and agility without the components being able to execute and have speed, precision, agility. That's where it's necessary. Okay? So ultimately, what you get to is that in all these organizations, they have to be able to do this. They have to be able to share amongst, not only within themselves, but they need to be able to share laterally. This is in the bottom part of the iceberg. And they need to be able to share also vertically with the cyber protection forces, that vertical above the waterline part of the iceberg. Okay? And when you get to that, when we can get to shared understanding, or as we gain better shared understanding, we can more effectively posture and position the forces to disrupt and defeat the adversary. When we do that, we can also deny the adversary better, right? Because in the aspect of that, we understand our weaknesses sooner. We understand what's important to us sooner. And we can then posture the forces to defend what's important to us sooner. And more importantly, we can begin to better deter the adversary from even waging the battle. Because ultimately, our success is in deterring the adversary from ever making the investment to engage us. Right? Because ultimately, we want to raise the deter part high enough that it's cost prohibitive to them. It's either costly in dollars or it's costly in time, and it's not worth their effort. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So this is the last slide they had in there. There should be like, I think, a question side left. I don't know what this is. I think somewhere on your app you get a rate the brief today. You can give me an A for shortness. I think you guys can finish this brief and actually move on to lunch rather quickly. All right, what I want to leave you with, in all seriousness, is from our perspective at the Joint Force Headquarters, we look at cyber and we said, hey, the journey down cyber often began with we're unique and different, and that led us down a path of doing a lot of things differently than is done in other domains. And as we began to look at the defensive domain and we stepped back and said, how is defense done writ large, regardless of domain? There are a lot of commonalities, a lot of good things the Department of Defense, really all military organizations, have studied about defense in all domains. Let's leverage those and apply them to the defensive domain. And key to that is the aspect of shared understanding across the maneuver forces, across the tactical forces and at the operational forces, so that we can posture and maneuver the forces to present a more defendable and defensive posture to an adversary. Right? Ultimately, our goal is to convince the adversary it isn't worth their investment to come into our space. Right? Go somewhere else, fundamentally. Right? All right. Questions?
Good day, sir. My name's Jay Myrick with the Connection Approval Office.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. My question is how do the CCSAs currently communicate laterally, and is there any thought of utilizing enterprise-level applications such as CMRS, continuous monitoring and risk assessment, and facilitating that?
Yeah. So the question was how do and how well do the CCSAs communicate horizontally with each other, and is there thought of using something like CMRS or other type tools to facilitate some of that horizontal communication sharing? So I would say that how well do we share is a pretty subjective view of the world, right? Subjective question. There are some things we share really well, right? What we don't share well, what I'd say is we don't share well from a timeliness standpoint. We tend to share well in and amongst ourselves and then percolate that up our organizational channels, right, to the heads, and then we comes back down. Boy, this is important. Share back down. It's important, right? So that's, from my perspective, that's like each of the players on a football team really actually understanding what's going on in my lane and sharing that up, right? And then each of the player running over to the defensive coordinator and saying, hey, this is what's happening. Please tell me what to do, right? And ultimately, we want to get to a place where the better we can self-synchronize and share that information so that the components, the forces, are self-synchronizing. That the defensive coordinator, or like the conductor in the orchestra, is just giving some guidance, right? Because the teams have practiced and executed and do this on a daily basis. That they should really only be coming to the defensive coordinator if they've seen something they haven't seen before, right? They're going to the conductor it's a really hard piece and they haven't played it before, they need to be synchronized through it. Now to the second half of your question, CMRS or other type tools, I think offer a lot of promise in this, right? Part of what I think we still need to get to is articulating not only that we share, but what is it we're sharing and why we're sharing it, right? For what decision we're trying to make with that information. And I don't think we've gone where we need to go in that space. We tend to share a lot of information, technical information, right? In the ones and zeros and boxes. And we struggle with how does that translate into operational direction to large entities. What's going on? What does this mean? And what are we doing about it? So the challenge in the share is that I'm not only sharing the bits and bytes, the CMRSs, but sharing what do we understand about this, and put this in relation to what do we understand that the adversary is currently doing or trying to do. If that makes sense. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Hey, you guys have been a great audience, and I realize it's lunchtime. All right. All right. There is a Jimmy John's next door here if you need a fast lunch. Okay, that's not a shameless plug for Jimmy John's, by the way. Okay, I got to say one last thing. Even though we're right next to Camden Yards, if there's anybody staying up here, if you don't get to a ball game while you're up here, shame on you. It's the greatest ballpark in the world. It's like their 25th anniversary. That being said, I do have to pull my lanyard out from work. Let's see. Here it is. Okay. It's not a Red Sox lanyard, but it is a Nationals lanyard, right? So I'm a National League guy, but I do get to a lot of Orioles games. So if you're in the area and you can, go see them. All right, thanks. You've been a great audience. See you.